What is the cost of discipleship? Well, imagine going to your favorite store and you browse around for the different merchandise and you find what you like. Now, what's the one question you always ask? How much does it cost, right? Well, think about it. You want to know how much it costs, probably because you want to know if you can afford it or not. Now, we always ask these questions, even daily in our lives. How much does this cost? How much does that cost? And we calculate in our minds, is the cost worth it? Now, think about this for a minute. Imagine going to a store and let's say you want to buy a bottle of water, right? You go into the store, you want to buy this bottle of water and it says $1. Well, $1, sure. You go and you buy this bottle of water, right? And let's say tomorrow you come back to the store and that same bottle of water in that same store now costs $100. Would you buy that bottle of water? Probably not, right? Because you're thinking in the back of your mind, well, wait a minute, it was $1 yesterday, now it's $100. The cost doesn't make sense. You just go somewhere else and buy it, right? Now, in the same way in our lives, we always count the cost when it comes to just about anything, right? We ask, well, is this worth it? And we don't just count the cost when it comes to monetary value, sometimes in our own efforts as well too, right? Is it worth doing this or that or, whatever it is? Because does the payoff, give me more than what I put the effort into, right? Well, if you think about it that way, in the gospel reading of Luke chapter 14, verses 25 to 33, Jesus speaks to his followers about the cost of discipleship. That's right. What it costs to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. Now, I remember years ago when I was giving a talk on the cost of discipleship to a group of high school students. At one point, a student raised his hand and asked, well, how much does it cost to follow Jesus anyways, right? And this student isn't necessarily asking for a monetary cost, but in other words, what must I do to follow Jesus and what must I give up? And does what I give up, equate to whatever reward I will get, right? So we're always calculating that in a certain sense, if it's worth it to follow Jesus. And it's a very good question too, because in our own lives, we always continually have to reflect on this very question. Is it worth it to follow Jesus? Well, he invites us to follow him, but at the end of the day, it's up to us, right? Whether or not we want to follow Jesus and not just follow him, but to become his disciple. And so here I'd like to share 3 very important points for us to reflect in this very gospel reading right here, chapter 14 of Luke, verses 25 to 33. Number one, this is really important, and one, I always get asked this question a lot. It says in the gospel where Jesus says, if anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, he cannot be my disciple. Now, if you think about it, I always get asked this question, right? Because people say, well, wait a minute. If I follow Jesus, does that mean I have to hate my mom and dad? I have to hate my children, my family, my brothers and sisters, my relatives, etc.? Well, let's pause here for a moment because you know what? The word hate in our modern sense of the word is different than what the gospel is referring to, right? In the Greek word. Because sometimes, we all know this, language doesn't translate over so well a lot of times, right? And so if we think of the modern word hate today, we think of it as an emotion, right? Let's just say, for example, I hate my desk, right? Or I hate this car, or I hate my neighbor, or a particular person, or a particular thing, right? And we attach a certain emotion to it. Well, back during the time of Jesus, in this gospel passage in particular, when it mentions the word hate, it's actually a reference to priority. In other words, Jesus has to be a higher priority than your family, than your children, than your brother, your sister, etc., right? So in other words, you have to put Jesus first in your life. This is the key here. And it's a matter of comparison. So whoever hates his mother or father, etc., more than me, Jesus is referring to putting him first in our lives, right? So Jesus is first, then our family, then everything else. This is something very important for us to consider. And so already, as we can see here, the cost of discipleship is not easy, right? There is a cost to discipleship, but it gets even more difficult, which leads us to point number 2. Jesus tells us to carry our own cross. Here's what it says: whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, think about this. Jesus says, in order for you to come after him, you must carry your cross. Now, what does that mean? Well, we all know that the cross signifies death. So in a certain sense, carrying our cross means that we're willing to die to follow Jesus Christ. So Jesus invites us to die to self, right? To ourselves, to deny ourselves so that we can truly follow him as his disciples. In other words, just like with our point number 1, we have to make Jesus the number 1 priority in our life, right? Number 1 priority. Now, take a look at the crowd who followed Jesus in the gospel, right? All 4 gospel, tells us that there's a large crowd that followed Jesus. Now, why do you think they follow Jesus? Well, some follow Jesus because, they want to see healing and miracles. Some follow Jesus because they're curious. Maybe some follow because they like his teaching. Maybe they like his preaching style. But then up to a certain point, Jesus challenges them. He says, if you wish to follow me, you must deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me, right? And sometimes people are confused. They're like, well, what's he talking about, right? And slowly in the gospel, as we see, people begin to leave, right? People begin to stop following Jesus. Why? Because it's not easy to follow Jesus. You have to take up your cross in order to follow Jesus. And some of these people, they calculate the cost and they say, well, wait a minute, you know what? I'll go somewhere else, right? Or I'll do something else. And here, as you see, Jesus always gives us the free choice to choose, right? He doesn't force us. He doesn't make us follow him. You have to follow me or else, right? But he gives us the free choice to choose. And as you follow in the gospel reading, fewer and fewer and fewer people follow Jesus, right? Eventually, Jesus journeyed all the way to the cross, to this cross you see here. And how many people were there when Jesus hung on the cross, right? Think about it. I always tell people it's easy to say you follow Jesus in words, right? But to put it in action is already difficult. But you know what? When life is going well and everything is great, it's easy to follow Jesus. It's when we face the challenges, the struggles, the difficulties in our lives, that really becomes the test of whether or not we truly are following Jesus. Think of a ship out at sea, for example, right? When the water's calm and everything is great, it just sails very smoothly. But when there are storms, when there are major storms out there and it means life and death or death, you can be very scared, right? Major storms. And so in the same way in our own lives too, if we follow Jesus, it's the difficult moments in our lives that really becomes a test of our faith, right? Those major storms really test us. Now, let's move on to point number 3. Point number 3, to tie all these 2 together, which I just shared, right? Talking about hating father, mother, children, family, etc., and talking about carrying our own cross and follow Jesus. Number 3 here I want to talk about is look to the examples of the saints who are also martyrs in the church. The martyrs of the church are really testimonies of faith to us, right? They followed Jesus. They took up their cross, followed Jesus all the way to the end, even if it meant death, right? Now, if we read about some of the stories of the martyr saints in the church, they truly inspire us to deepen our relationship, to take up our cross, and to follow Jesus. And so if you really think about it, I want to just give you 3 examples of saints who are also martyrs. Number 1 is Saint Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles. Now, many of us are familiar with St. Paul, right? We see his writings throughout the New Testament. Now, St. Paul, before his conversion, he went about and persecuted the Christians. But after his conversion and after his encounter with Jesus Christ, everything completely changed, right? He went and he preached Jesus Christ all the way to the very end, even if it meant death for him. So that was a test of martyrdom, a test of faith for him, right? carrying his cross and following Jesus. The second saint I'd like to share, it was also a martyr, is Saint Stephen, the very first martyr in the church. Now, if you want to read more about Saint Stephen, the first martyr, you can find it in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 7, verses 54 to 60, right? And then the third saint I'd like to share is Saint Maximilian Kolbe. Now, he's a more contemporary time. He was a Franciscan who was in the Auschwitz camp, right, during the Nazi occupation, and he volunteered to die in place of someone else. Now, these three are great witnesses for us personally, right, to take up our cross and to follow Jesus. Now, some time ago, I made a video and talked about the difference between being a follower of Jesus and being a disciple. And it's easy just to follow something, right, or someone. And as you just follow someone, sometimes after a while you get tired, you leave, right? The challenge is to become a disciple of Jesus. Now, to become a disciple of Jesus, you must change your life, order your life to be more like Christ each day. And the challenge to become a disciple of Jesus Christ is to place him number one, priority in our lives, and then number two, to take up our cross and follow Jesus. Now, if you really think about all of this, the idea is to calculate the cost, right? What is the cost of discipleship with Jesus Christ? And is that cost worth it? What do you think? May God bless you.